The grand halls of the Zarethian Empire's royal palace shimmered with golden lights. Towering crystal pillars stretched toward the high ceiling, where holographic constellations glowed softly. The air smelled of exotic spices, and the hum of deep alien music filled the banquet hall. Captain Ethan Voss adjusted the stiff collar of his formal diplomatic uniform. He had traveled across the galaxy for this mission, a peace negotiation between humanity and the mighty Zarethian Empire. The Zarethians were a powerful warrior race, ruling several star systems with unmatched combat skills and honor-bound traditions. Ethan had read the reports. The Zarethians respected strength above all else. If humanity wanted an alliance, they needed to prove they were not weak. That was why the United Terran Federation had sent him, a man who had fought in countless battles and survived against impossible odds. At the head of the banquet table sat Empress Zkera Vel Sharon, the ruler of the Zarethians. Her eyes, golden and sharp, studied Ethan like a hunter observing prey. Beside her sat Princess Syra Vel Sharon, her daughter and heir to the throne. Syra was tall, her deep blue skin shimmering under the palace lights. Her long black hair was tied into warrior braids, and she wore traditional Zarethian battle armor even at this formal event. She didn't look impressed by Ethan's presence. The banquet had been smooth so far. Ethan had spoken of Earth's desire for peace and cooperation, and the Empress had listened, though she had not yet given an answer. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the Zarethian nobles, a towering warrior named General Kelthor, smirked at Ethan. "Tell me, human," he said, his voice deep and mocking. "We hear you are a warrior, but can you fight? Or do you only speak with words?" Ethan knew this was a test. If he backed down, the Zarethians would see humanity as weak. If he accepted, he risked offending the royal family. He chose his words carefully. "I prefer peace over war," Ethan said, meeting Kelthor's gaze. "But I don't fear a fight when necessary." The general laughed, turning to the Empress. "Then let him prove it." The Empress raised an eyebrow, but did not stop the challenge. Instead, her gaze shifted to her daughter. "Syra," she said, "since you are the future ruler, why don't you test our guest?" Syra's sharp eyes snapped toward Ethan. She did not like this idea, but she could not refuse a command from her mother. "Very well," she said, standing up. "Let's see if the human can survive a warrior's duel." Ethan sighed inwardly. This was not how diplomacy was supposed to go. The duel. The palace's training arena was circular, surrounded by towering statues of ancient Zarethian warriors. The floor was made of smooth black stone, etched with battle scars from past duels. A crowd had gathered, nobles, warriors, and diplomats, watching with eager eyes. Zara stepped into the arena, rolling her shoulders. She carried two curved plasma daggers, their blue edges humming with power. Ethan was handed a standard Zarethian combat staff, a long metallic weapon used for close combat. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said, gripping the staff. Zara smirked. "Are you afraid, human?" He chuckled. "I just don't want to embarrass a princess in front of her people." Syra's golden eyes flashed. "Then try." The signal was given, and she lunged. Ethan barely dodged as her plasma dagger sliced through the air. She was fast, unnaturally fast. He blocked her next strike with the staff, but the impact sent a sharp vibration up his arms. She wasn't holding back. Ethan had fought many enemies before, pirates, mercenaries, even rogue AIs. But Syra was different. She moved with the precision of a trained warrior, her strikes aiming for vital points. He adapted. Instead of meeting her speed, he used his human instincts. He baited her, drawing her into overextending an attack. At the last moment, he spun and swept her legs out from under her. The crowd gasped. Zara hit the ground but rolled back up instantly. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She had underestimated him. Ethan smirked. "Want to stop now?" She growled. "Not a chance." The duel continued, but now Zara fought harder. She forced Ethan to block rapid strikes, but he stayed calm. Finally, he saw an opening. As she aimed for his shoulder, he twisted sideways and used the staff to disarm her, knocking the dagger from her hand. He pointed the staff at her chest, the clear winner. Silence fell over the arena. Then the Empress let out a deep chuckle. "Impressive," she said. "Few can defeat my daughter in combat." Ethan lowered his weapon and stepped back. It was a fair match. But when he turned to leave, Zyra grabbed his wrist. Her expression was unreadable. "You fought well, human," she said. "But do you know what you just did?" Ethan frowned. "Won a duel." She smirked, but there was something dangerous in her eyes. "No, you claimed me as your mate." Ethan's heart stopped. The crowd cheered. And in that moment, he realized he was in serious trouble. Ethan Voss stood frozen in the center of the Zyrethian battle arena. The words of Princess Zyra Vel-Sharon echoed in his mind. "You claimed me as your mate." The crowd erupted in cheers, warriors pounding their fists against their armored chests in approval. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully, looking at Zyra. "This was just a sparring match." Zyra smirked, though her golden eyes burned with intensity. "Not to the Zyrethians." Before Ethan could protest further, the Empress Zukara Vel-Sharon stood from her throne. The hall fell silent. She stepped forward, towering and regal, her deep blue skin reflecting the soft glow of the arena lights. "In our culture, besting a warrior in single combat is not just a victory," she said, her voice smooth but powerful. "It is a claim." A challenge answered. A bond formed. Ethan's jaw tightened. This was bad. He turned to Zyra. "You're telling me that because I won, I'm now—" "What? Your fiancé?" Zyra crossed her arms. "Yes, unless you choose to dishonor me and reject the claim." A tense silence followed. Ethan could feel dozens of Zyrethian eyes locked onto him, watching, judging. He had spent enough time studying alien diplomacy to understand what Zyra meant. If he rejected her, it wouldn't just be a personal insult. It would be seen as a dishonor to the royal family. That kind of disrespect could easily shatter any chance of alliance between humanity and the Zyrethians. Worse, it might even lead to war. Ethan clenched his fists. He had no choice. Taking a slow breath, he met Zyra's gaze. "What happens next?" The Empress smiled. "Tomorrow, we hold the rite of binding. You will be tested as Zyra's chosen mate. If you pass, the bond is sealed. And if I fail—" Zyra's expression darkened. "Then you die. The price of honor." After the ceremony, Ethan was led to a royal guest chamber, a massive room filled with ancient Zyrethian artifacts, glowing crystals, and a balcony overlooking the capital city. But he couldn't enjoy the view. His mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this mess. The door slid open behind him. Zyra stepped in, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You seem troubled," she said. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Let me get this straight. Because I want to fight, I'm suddenly engaged to an alien princess, and if I fail some kind of test tomorrow, I die." Zyra smirked. "Yes." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Great, just great." She walked closer, her movements fluid like a trained predator. "I will admit, I didn't expect you to win. No human has ever bested me in combat." "Well, I didn't plan on it," Ethan muttered. Zyra tilted her head. "You are not weak, human. That is why my people are accepting this. But strength alone won't save you tomorrow." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What is this rite of binding exactly?" "It is a series of tests, trials of strength, intellect, and loyalty. If you pass, you prove yourself worthy. If you fail—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan let out a slow breath. He wasn't afraid of a challenge, but this was life or death. "And what do you think?" he asked. "Do you want this?" Zyra hesitated. Her confident smirk wavered for just a second. "I was raised to follow my people's traditions. My duty is to my empire." She met his gaze. "But I will not be bound to a weak mate." Ethan chuckled dryly. "Well, that makes two of us." For the first time, a small smile tugged at Zyra's lips. "Then prove yourself tomorrow, human, or die trying." She turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The first trial. The next morning, Ethan was taken to the Hall of Warriors, an ancient chamber filled with statues of past champions. Hundreds of Zyrethians gathered to witness the trials. The Empress sat on her throne, Cyrus standing beside her. A Zyrethian elder stepped forward. The rite of binding consists of 3 trials. The first, the trial of strength. Ethan barely had time to react before a massive Zyrethian warrior stepped into the arena. This one was even bigger than the others, with heavy armor and a double-bladed energy axe. "Defeat your opponent," the elder declared. "Prove your might." Ethan sighed. Of course. Another fight. The warrior charge. Ethan dodged the first swing, barely avoiding the glowing axe blade. The crowd roared as he rolled aside, grabbing a fallen combat staff from the arena floor. He barely had time to block before another heavy strike came at him. The Zyrethian was strong. Too strong. A direct hit would break Ethan's bones. He needed to be smart. Using his human agility, he dodged again, keeping his movements unpredictable. Instead of matching the Zyrethian's brute force, Ethan aimed for pressure points, targeting the warrior's joints. The battle was brutal. Sweat dripped from Ethan's brow as he dodged, struck, and countered. Finally, he saw his opening. He used the staff to sweep the warrior's legs out from under him, then pressed the weapon to his throat. Silence. Then the Empress spoke. "Victory belongs to the human." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan stepped back, breathing heavily. He glanced at Zyra, who nodded approvingly. 1 trial down. 2 more to go. And failure was still not an option. Ethan Voss stood in the Grand Hall of Warriors, sweat dripping from his brow. The cheers of the crowd still echoed in his ears after his victory in the trial of strength. He had just defeated a massive Zyrethian warrior, proving that he was not weak. But this was only the beginning. 2 more trials remained. On the royal throne, Empress Zikara Vel-Sharon observed him with quiet amusement. Beside her, Princess Zyra watched closely, her golden eyes unreadable. The elder stepped forward again. "The second trial, the trial of intellect, will now begin." Ethan exhaled slowly. "All right," he muttered. "What's the challenge this time?" The elder raised his hands, and the arena floor shifted. Panels of metal slid apart, revealing a large circular platform. The ground beneath it sank, forming a deep pit filled with a strange shimmering liquid. Ethan had no idea what it was, but he had a feeling falling into it wouldn't be pleasant. 4 large stone pillars rose from the floor, each one covered in strange glowing symbols. The elder spoke again. "To prove yourself worthy, you must decipher the code of the ancients and activate the correct sequence. If you fail," he gestured toward the pit, "you will fall into the void pool, a substance that will trap you in an endless loop of time until your mind breaks." Ethan stiffened. "Oh, great, a fate worse than death." The elder turned to him. "Do you accept the challenge?" Ethan didn't have a choice. He nodded. A moment later, the symbols on the pillars began to glow, shifting into different patterns. The trial had begun. A battle of wits. Ethan rushed to the first pillar. The symbols looked like ancient Zyrethian script, but there were also numbers and geometric shapes. It reminded him of complex logic puzzles, the kind used to test high-ranking strategists in the Terran Federation. He studied the patterns. Each symbol represented a different concept: war, peace, unity, chaos. But they were scrambled, out of order. His brain worked fast. If this is a code, Then there must be a sequence, a pattern. He glanced at the other pillars. The symbols were different on each one, but there were connections. It was like solving a puzzle where each piece influenced the next. The crowd watched in silence. Zyra leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. Ethan's mind raced. He traced his fingers over the engravings, mentally testing different combinations. If he chose the wrong one, the floor beneath him would collapse. He took a deep breath. Then he pressed a sequence of symbols. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a loud hum filled the air. The first pillar locked into place. The crowd murmured in approval. Ethan moved quickly to the second pillar. The pattern here was different, but he noticed something. The last symbol from the first pillar matched one of the symbols here. It's a chain reaction. He worked fast, testing combinations, using his sharp tactical mind to see the pattern. One by one, the pillars locked into place. Finally, he reached the fourth and final pillar. This was the hardest. The symbols seemed wrong, like they didn't match the previous ones. Sweat trickled down his neck. He was missing something. Then it hit him. It's a reverse pattern. He quickly pressed the opposite sequence from the first pillar, flipping the logic. The moment he did, a deep chime echoed through the hall. The glowing symbols turned a bright golden color, and the pit beneath him sealed shut. Silence. Then, the Empress clapped her hands once. The human has succeeded. The crowd roared. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He had done it. A warrior's respect. After the trial, Ethan was escorted back to his chamber. His muscles were sore, his mind exhausted, but he had survived another test. A few moments later, the door slid open. Zyra entered. "You continue to surprise me, human," she said, crossing her arms. Ethan smirked. "You thought I'd fail, didn't you?" She tilted her head. "I thought you would struggle more. The trial of intellect is designed to challenge even our greatest scholars." Ethan shrugged. "Humans have their own way of thinking." Zyra stepped closer. "You have proven strength and intelligence, but there is still one final trial." Ethan's expression hardened. "And what is it?" Her golden eyes locked onto his. "The trial of loyalty." He frowned. "Loyalty? To who?" She studied him for a moment before saying, "To me." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What does that mean?" he asked carefully. "You will see soon enough," Zyra said, turning toward the door. Before leaving, she glanced back at him. "Rest while you can, Ethan Voss. Tomorrow, you face the final trial. And the greatest test of all." With that, she was gone. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. What had he gotten himself into? One trial left. And this one felt different. Ethan Voss sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the metal walls of his chamber. 2 trials down. 1 left. The trial of strength had tested his combat skills. The trial of intellect had forced him to prove his intelligence. But this last trial, the trial of loyalty. Loyalty to who? Princess Zyra's words echoed in his mind. "To me." What did that even mean? Before he could think further, the door slid open. 2 royal guards stepped in, their deep blue armor shining under the chamber's light. "It is time, human," one of them said. Ethan stood up, took a deep breath, and followed them out. The arena of truth. The grand arena was silent, unlike the previous trials, where warriors and nobles had gathered to watch. Only a few figures stood waiting. At the center was Empress Zkera, her regal presence commanding the space. Beside her stood Zyra, her expression unreadable. Ethan's eyes shifted to the far side of the arena. His stomach tightened. 3 humans stood there. They were dressed in torn uniforms, soldiers of the Terran Federation. One of them, a woman with short brown hair, looked at him in shock. "Commander Voss," she gasped. Ethan's heart pounded. He knew her, Lieutenant Sarah Decker. She had been part of a diplomatic team sent to negotiate with the Xyrethians weeks ago, but they had gone missing. His fists clenched. Were they prisoners? The Empress raised a hand. Ethan Voss, you have proven your strength and intelligence. Now, you must prove your loyalty. Ethan forced himself to stay calm. What does that mean? Tadera took a step forward. Loyalty is not just about words, human. It is about action. This trial will test where your true allegiance lies. She gestured toward the humans. These Terran soldiers were captured after violating Xyrethian territory. Under our law, they are guilty of trespassing and espionage. The punishment is execution. Sarah's eyes widened. No, we were sent for diplomacy, not war. Ethan's pulse raced. He looked at the Empress. You can't just kill them. This is a misunderstanding. The Empress tilted her head. Perhaps, but the law must be upheld. Zera held out a small ceremonial dagger, its blade reflecting the arena lights. You have two choices, Ethan, she said. You can take this blade and carry out their punishment, proving your loyalty to me and my people. She let the words sink in before continuing. Or, her eyes darkened. You can defy us, fight for them, and be declared a traitor to the Xyrethian Empire. Silence fell over the arena. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't a trial of skill or intelligence. This was a test of his soul. He looked at Sarah and the two soldiers beside her. They were terrified but trusted him to find a way out. He looked at Syra, the woman he had unintentionally claimed as his mate. She stood firm, her gaze challenging him. The Empress watched, waiting. The guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Ethan's mind raced. What could he do? A different path. Ethan exhaled slowly and stepped forward. He took the ceremonial dagger from Sarah's hand. Sarah's breath hitched. Ethan, no. But then Ethan did something no one expected. He turned the blade around and dropped it. The dagger clattered against the stone floor, the sound echoing through the silent arena. Ethan raised his head and looked straight into Sarah's golden eyes. Loyalty isn't about choosing sides, he said. It's about doing what's right. Sarah's lips parted slightly, surprised by his answer. Ethan turned to the Empress. If you want to kill them, you'll have to go through me. The royal guards tensed, gripping their weapons. The Empress narrowed her eyes. You would risk your life for them. Ethan stood his ground. I don't care about politics. I care about honor. And this is an honor. Zyra watched him for a long moment. Then, without warning, she smiled. The Empress chuckled softly. Fascinating. She turned to the guards. Released the prisoners. Sarah blinked in shock. Wait. What? Ethan looked at Zyra, confused. Was this part of the test? Zyra nodded. Loyalty is not blind obedience. A true leader must know when to stand for justice, even if it means defying orders. Ethan let out a breath. So, I passed. The Empress smiled. Yes, human, you passed. Bound by fate. That night, Ethan stood on the palace balcony, watching the twin moons of the Xyrethian homeworld. He had survived all 3 trials. He was now officially Syra's mate. The door behind him slid open. He turned to see Syra approaching. You did well today, she said. Ethan smirked. Admit it, you thought I'd fail. She chuckled. I had my doubts. He shook his head. So what now? Zyra's gaze softened. Now, we prepare for the future. You are bound to me, Ethan Voss. Whether you like it or not, we are allies and partners. Ethan sighed. No turning back now. Zyra stepped closer, her golden eyes filled with something new. Respect. And maybe something more. No, human, she said softly. No turning back. Ethan Voss stood on the royal balcony, staring at the twin moons of Xyrethia. He had passed the 3 trials, proving his strength, intelligence, and loyalty. He was now bound to Princess Tyra, the future ruler of the Zyrethian Empire. And yet, his mind was troubled. The Terran prisoners had been freed, but the tension between humans and Zyrethians was still strong. The Empress had allowed him to prove his honor, but that didn't mean everyone accepted him. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You seem troubled, human." He turned to see Tyra, standing beside him, her golden eyes watching him carefully. Ithan sighed. "I don't know what happens next. I survived your trials, but I still feel like an outsider." Zyra smirked. "That's because you are. But don't worry, you will earn your place." Ithan folded his arms. "And what exactly is my place?" Zyra stepped closer. "You are my mate. That means you stand beside me. But being my mate also means you have enemies." Ithan's jaw tightened. "Let me guess, there are people who don't like a human being this close to the royal family." Zyra nodded. "Many nobles believe our empire should remain pure. They see your victory in the trials as unnatural." Ithan sighed. "Great. More people trying to kill me." Zyra chuckled. "Welcome to Zyrethian politics. The assassins in the shadows." The next day, Ithan walked through the palace corridors, escorted by 2 royal guards. He was still adjusting to his new role. Everywhere he went, Zyrethians whispered about him. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with disdain. Then, it happened. A sudden shift in the air, a strange hissing sound. Ithan's instincts screamed danger. He barely had time to react before something sharp flew past his face, embedding itself into the stone wall. A dagger. "Ambush," one of the guards shouted. From the shadows, 3 assassins leaped forward, their dark armor blending into the dim corridors. Ithan dodged as the first assassin lunged at him. He barely avoided the deadly blade, twisting to the side and countering with a punch. His fist connected with the assassin's helmet, sending them stumbling back. The guards fought fiercely, but the assassins were skilled. One of them broke through the defense line and rushed toward Ithan. Ithan reacted purely on instinct. He grabbed the dagger from the wall and slashed upward, catching the assassin's arm. The attacker hissed in pain but didn't stop. Ithan rolled backward as another blade swung inches from his throat. He grabbed the fallen assassin's wrist and twisted hard, disarming them. With one swift motion, Ithan drove the dagger into the attacker's shoulder. The assassin fell, groaning in pain. The remaining 2 assassins saw their fallen ally and retreated into the shadows. The guards rushed to Ithan. "Are you injured?" Ithan shook his head. "I'm fine." "Who were they?" One of the guards knelt beside the wounded assassin and pulled off the attacker's mask. Ithan's eyes narrowed. The assassin wasn't a common mercenary. They were a noble. Enemies among us. The captured assassin was taken to the royal court, where the Empress and Tyra waited. Ithan stood beside them as the assassin was forced to kneel before the throne. The Empress's eyes burned with anger. "Who sent you?" The assassin refused to answer. Zyra stepped forward. "You are noble-born. That means this attack was planned by someone in the royal court." Ithan folded his arms. "So it's not just the common people who hate me. Even your nobles want me dead." The Empress's expression remained unreadable. "You are a disruption, Ithan Voss, a human, standing beside my daughter, bound by the laws of our people. There are those who will stop at nothing to remove you." Ithan clenched his fists. "Then I'll fight them." The Empress raised an eyebrow. "You misunderstand. This is not a battle of weapons. This is a battle of politics and power. If you want to survive in this court, you must learn the game." Ithan sighed. "I was never good at politics." Zyra smirked. "Then you'd better learn fast." The Empress turned back to the assassin. "Take them to the dungeons. We will find out who they serve." As the guards dragged the assassin away, Ithan looked at Tyra. "So, what now?" Zyra's golden eyes gleamed. "Now, we prepare for the real fight. The war begins." That night, Ithan stood once again on the palace balcony. His trials were over, But the real danger had only just begun. Zira joined him, standing by his side. You survived an assassination attempt. That proves you are stronger than they thought. Ethan exhaled. They'll try again. Zyra nodded. Yes, but next time, we'll be ready. Ethan turned to her. Are you sure about this alliance? I mean, your people don't even want me here. Zyra studied him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and placed her hand on his. You claimed me as your mate, Ethan Voss, she said softly. And now, there is no turning back. Ethan looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. No turning back. A storm was coming. And together, they would face it. Ethan Voss sat in the grand hall of the palace, his muscles tense. The attempt on his life had shaken the royal court. Every noble, every warrior, every diplomat present knew what it meant. Someone powerful wanted him dead. The Empress had ordered an investigation, but Ethan knew the truth. This wasn't over. Princess Zyra sat beside him, her golden eyes scanning the room. She leaned toward him and whispered, The real battle has begun, Ethan. Be ready. He nodded. He was always ready. A dangerous invitation. Later that evening, a messenger arrived at Ethan's chamber. The young Zarethian handed him a sealed letter. Ethan opened it and frowned. Meet me at the Lunar Garden at midnight. Come alone. I have information about the traitor. No name, no signature, just a warning. Sarah read over his shoulder. It could be a trap. Ethan smirked. Of course, it's a trap, but that doesn't mean I'm not going. Zyra sighed. You're impossible. He shrugged. And yet you're stuck with me. She rolled her eyes. Fine, but you're not going alone. The midnight meeting. The Lunar Garden was a place of beauty. Tall silver trees, glowing blue flowers, and a small pond reflecting the twin moons. It was peaceful, but tonight it felt dangerous. Ethan arrived first. Zyra was hidden in the shadows, watching from a distance. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. A noblewoman. She was tall and elegant, dressed in deep blue robes. Her dark eyes held secrets. You are bold to come here, human, she said. Ethan folded his arms. You said you have information about the traitor. She nodded. Yes, but first, you must listen carefully. Ethan stayed silent. The noblewoman took a deep breath. The attack on you was not just from one person. It was a faction. A secret alliance of nobles who believe the royal family is weakening our empire by allowing a human into their ranks. Ethan clenched his fists. Who leads them? She hesitated. I do not know their leader's name, but I know their next move. Ethan narrowed his eyes. And what is that? She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. An attack on the Empress. A coup. If they succeed, Zyra will never take the throne. Ethan's blood ran cold. Zyra had heard enough. She stepped out of the shadows, her hand on her weapon. Tell us everything. Now, the noblewoman took a step back, startled. I have risked my life telling you this, but if you wish to stop them, you must act quickly. Ethan and Sarah exchanged glances. Time was running out. Preparing for war. Back in the palace, Ethan and Sarah rushed to the royal chamber. The Empress sat on her throne, listening to their warning. When they finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. I expected this, she said calmly. Ethan frowned. You knew. She nodded. There have been whispers of rebellion, but I needed proof. Zyra stepped forward. Mother, we have to act now. If we wait, they will strike first. The Empress nodded. Agreed. She looked at Ethan. And what do you suggest, human? Ethan exhaled. We don't wait for them. We strike first. Zyra smirked. I like the way you think. The battle in the shadows. That night, the palace guards moved in secret. They knew where the rebels were hiding. a secret chamber beneath the Great Hall. Ethan led a small team of warriors, moving through the dark corridors. Thyra was beside him, her blade ready. They reached the hidden chamber's entrance. Ethan nodded to the guards. They kicked the doors open. Inside, the traitors were gathered. The room erupted into chaos. Blades clashed. Energy weapons fired. The battle was fast and brutal. Ethan fought like a soldier, efficient and deadly. A rebel noble swung at him with a curved sword, but Ethan dodged and knocked the weapon away, delivering a hard punch to the noble's face. Zira moved like a storm, her golden hair flashing as she cut down an enemy with her plasma blade. The battle ended quickly. The surviving rebels were captured, forced to their knees. Ethan wiped blood from his cheek. "Where's your leader?" One of the captured rebels laughed. "You think this is over, human?" Zyra's eyes darkened. "We'll find out soon enough." The final warning. The captured rebels were taken before the Empress. She stood tall, her eyes cold. "You have betrayed your empire. You will face justice." One of the rebels spat on the ground. "You are the one who has betrayed us, allowing a human to stand beside the princess. It is an insult to our people." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, well, get used to it." The Empress sighed. "You will reveal the name of your leader, or suffer the consequences." The rebel hesitated. Then, with a cruel smile, he said one name. "Lord Kale." The room fell silent. Zyra's expression turned to shock. "That's impossible. He was my father's most trusted advisor." Ethan exhaled. "Looks like we have our final enemy." The Empress nodded. "And we will face him soon." Zyra turned to Ethan. "This is it, human. The final battle is coming." Ethan cracked his knuckles. "Then let's finish this." The palace was no longer safe. The traitors had been exposed, but their leader, Lord Kale, was still out there. He was once the most trusted advisor of the royal family, but now he was their greatest enemy. Ethan Voss stood beside Princess Zyra, his muscles tense. The war was no longer in the shadows. It was coming straight for them. "The rebellion won't stop," Zyra said. "Kel will strike with everything he has." Ethan nodded. "Then we hit him first." The Empress looked at them both. "You have proven yourself human, but this will be the hardest battle yet." Ethan smirked. "Good. I like a challenge." Storming the fortress, Lord Kel had fled to a stronghold outside the city. It was an ancient fortress, built into the cliffs, surrounded by high walls and energy shields. Ethan and Xera led a team of Zyrethian warriors to end the rebellion once and for all. As they approached the fortress, Xera pointed to the main gates. "They'll expect a frontal attack." Ethan grinned. "Then we don't go through the front." Instead, they moved through the shadows, climbing the rocky cliffs. It was dangerous, but Ethan had learned that surprise was the best weapon. At the top, they saw Kel's army, hundreds of warriors, ready for war. Zyra clenched her fists. "We have to end this now." Ethan pulled out his weapon. "Then let's do it. The battle begins." Zyra signaled the attack. The royal forces rushed down the cliffs, catching the enemy by surprise. Blades clashed. Plasma weapons fired. Ethan fought like a warrior. He dodged an enemy's sword and countered with a hard punch, knocking them out. Another rebel charged, but Ethan rolled aside and took them down with a single shot. Zyra fought beside him, her golden blade flashing in the air. She moved with deadly grace, cutting through the rebels like a storm. But then, a massive explosion. The rebels had activated their defense turrets. Ethan shouted, "Take cover." Blasts shook the ground as warriors dived for safety. If they didn't stop those turrets, the battle would be lost. The showdown. Ethan and Zyra fought their way toward the control center, cutting through enemy lines. Then, they saw him. Lord Kale. The old noble stood on the balcony, watching them with cold eyes. "You are too late." Ethan raised his weapon. "Surrender." Kale laughed. You do not belong here, human, and I will never bow to a weak empire. He drew his sword, a long glowing blade. The final battle had begun. The duel. Kale was fast. His sword swung in deadly arcs, forcing Ethan to dodge again and again. Zyra attacked from the side, but Kale blocked her strike and kicked her back. Ethan gritted his teeth. This old man was strong. Kale lunged at Ethan. A sharp pain. The blade barely missed his chest, cutting his armor. Ethan rolled aside and countered with a hard punch to Kale's ribs. The noble staggered, but recovered quickly. You fight well, human, Kale admitted, but you will lose. Ethan wiped blood from his lip. Yeah, we'll see about that. Kale swung his blade again. Ethan barely dodged, then grabbed Kale's arm and twisted it, forcing the sword down. Zyra saw her chance. She moved in, her golden blade slicing through Kale's weapon. His sword shattered. Kale fell to his knees, breathing hard. You fools. Ethan grabbed him by the collar. It's over. Victory and a new future. The battle was won. The rebels surrendered after Kale's defeat. The royal forces took control of the fortress. The rebellion had ended. Ethan stood with Zyra, watching the sunrise over the battlefield. You did it, Zyra said. You saved the Empire. Ethan smirked. We did it. Together. Zyra studied him. You could leave now, if you want. Return to your people. Ethan fought for a moment. Then he shook his head. I think I'll stay, he said. After all, I made a promise. Zyra smiled. And now, there's no turning back.